Welcome to another episode of Connect This. Sorry, I got that wrong anyway. Connect This. That's the way I want to say it. It's actually kind of a joke to some movies by who did Blazing Saddles? Now I'm just
Mel Brooks.
spiraling
Mel
here.
Brooks.
Mel Brooks. Thank you. It's just terrible. And I have once again. So this is the thing. I do the introduction and then I start hearing myself because I didn't mute my own dang thing so I can watch the stream. I'm excited for this conversation. This is going to be possibly the most contentious Connect This ever with Dane Jasper, the CEO of Sonic in California. Welcome to the show, Dane.
Thanks, Chris. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. You're looking magnificent in the lighting today.
Oh, thank you. I got a new ring light. I'm very thrilled.
Yes, it's working. It's working for you. We also have Jeff Christensen. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Chris, good to be here. Thank you.
You may know Jeff from numerous interviews in the past with me, from his TEDx career, from EntryPoint Networks. He's done a lot of work with Ammon and other communities to be named later in terms of building a specific type of open access network that we'll be talking about. And then we also have our returning champion, Travis Carter from US Internet. Welcome back, Travis.
Woo. Thanks, Chris.
And I'm Chris Mitchell at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I host this, at least until we can find someone better. And I am very excited to spend the day talking about open access, but we're going to start by just a quick survey of something that the current FCC and Chairman Pai got wrong, something that they got right. And I'll start with you, Dane. What did they get wrong? What did they get right?
It's certainly been an interesting time with this administration. I'd start with what they got right. They really focused on a deployment agenda, and there's a few items that were positive there. The one that really stands out for me is the reforms around one-touch make-ready to assure carriers access to polls in a more streamlined way. So I'd say they got that right as they thought about deployment. Wrong, they're really engaged in destroying competitive local exchange carriers by eliminating the entire bones of the 96 Telecom Act. And the core of that is unbundled network elements and access to the legacy copper and intercity fiber. And setting those aside last month was just a really bad decision.
That's something that we haven't covered here. I think a lot of people may not have heard about it. So I just want to spend a second. And this is where companies like you are able to lease, or actually the incumbent is required to lease you service so that you're able to connect customers without having to build a whole new infrastructure, which was the whole framework of the 1996 Act, which was gutted slowly and quickly over the years.
Yeah, this is a huge loss for competitive carriers. And what the Act recognized was that you had these monopoly facilities that were paid for by ratepayers. This is copper lines to every home and fiber between cities. And unbundling that, making that available to new market entrants would facilitate competition and for us deployment. So we will deploy first, a VDSL service, it might be a 20, 40, 100 megabit service over copper while we build fiber to the home. And so the loss of that framework is a big hit for competitive carriers.
Yes, and poorly covered. So, Jeff, this is supposed to be a lightning round. I've already failed at my hosting job to keep it a lightning round.
Yes,
what have they gotten right? What did they get wrong?
I think what they got right was giving help to communities and density areas that need help with financing and funding. What they got wrong was 25 by 3, or continue to get wrong was 25 by 3. Fiber should be the basis of almost everything. Maybe not everything, but almost everything.
Yeah, not only is it wrong, they've locked it in for 10 years. Some of the people getting RDOF money may be getting 25/3 subsidized in 10 years.
Yeah.
Travis, what did they get wrong? What did they get right?
Well, I think Jeff took my wrong. As we've alluded to in the other conversations, I think 25 by 3 is terrible, especially using public funds for that. Especially with the advent of gigabit over 16 years ago. Don't you think we should be deploying that as the minimum today? But what the Trump FCC, Chris, did right, the 6 gigahertz spectrum, the entire block open for Wi-Fi, I think will be one of the biggest leave behinds, the high end of the 5.9 spectrum that's available now for Wi-Fi. And I think the CBRS auction strategy was really well done, and the allocation of spectrum for small carriers in the 365 range. So that's what I think they did right. And I have to copy Jeff on the wrong. 25.3 is a joke as far as I'm concerned.
I have no disagreement with any of those claims. I would use the moderator's privilege to say that the thing I think they got the most right that I was totally surprised by is the tribal priority window for 2.5. I think that's really important. I think we desperately need to create more spectrum assets for tribal governments. The thing that another thing that I think other people may not have caught up on was when they did the auction for CAF2, they made it very transparent. And having access to that, I think, has really been a benefit for people to study and get a sense of what happened. And that's really nice. What they got wrong, I think, so many things, Travis. So many things.
All right, let's hear.
No, but I'll focus on the most recent one, which is this nonsense about overbuilding, in which they basically, particularly Commissioner O'Reilly, is just lying or getting his facts way wrong in terms of accusing one local company of overbuilding another. This is something that we will be talking about in the future, because this is something I think we're going to hear a lot about, whether or not government should be creating competition and how much we should spend to make sure the government doesn't accidentally create competition by mistake, because Republicans right now are pushing to spend a lot on that, and I don't think it's worth it at all. So the topics that we want to get into are going to be dealing with open access, but there's one other thing I wanted to cover because I think Jeff has interesting ideas on this, and Dane, you've been very outspoken. Bandwidth caps. Comcast has announced new bandwidth caps. I kind of think it's a surprise. Many of us thought they did not have bandwidth caps in New England because they face so much FiOS competition in those suburban areas, and they've decided to embrace bandwidth caps anyway. So Dane, let me come to you first once again and just ask, what's your take on this? I mean,
bandwidth caps are a side effect of a failed competitive market. You know, you have an oligopoly, a duopoly at best, but for higher speed services, the kinds of services that users of more download or upload would want are generally a cable monopoly in most markets. And so, you know, this is rent-seeking behavior. It's opportunistic. And the fact of the matter is the sort of cost of goods sold, the internet content people are consuming and creating, is de minimis compared to the cost of the infrastructure. And whether the lights are blinking or not blinking, or you're sending or not sending data over the line, it doesn't really matter. And so it's a pretty transparent kind of cash grab.
Jeff, you're a huge fan of bandwidth caps, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, I am actually a fan of this because I think it accelerates the demise of this model. So, you know, we had more cheers than jeers from this decision. It'd be interesting to see what their data. I mean, you know, I want to give them some credibility on making the decision that there's some business reason, but I think we all know there's probably not, and that because, you know, I spent a lot of time in New England, and in many places they've got a monopoly. And so they're behaving like a monopolist, and they're looking after their interests and not really thinking about the subscribers' interests. So I think it's, you know, it's short-sighted, and, you know, we'll see where it goes.
And Travis, is this something you react in the same way, where much like Jeff, you're just excited to have one more thing to have Comcast driving their own customers into your arms?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the greatest marketing pieces ever. You know, I commend Comcast, and I highly encourage them to keep doing it. You know, because it just increases our market share in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Now, I want to, like I said, we're going to devote time to this overbuilding nonsense. Not that I think I mean, let me just be clear. I think it's important to have a good debate and be honest about the role of government in creating competition. I don't think that's what's been happening with this talk of overbuilding we're hearing about suddenly from Republicans on the Hill and from FCC commissioners. But Jeff, for the short version of this conversation, what's your reaction when you hear this talk about overbuilding being bad?
So yeah, I went out and looked. So I haven't had my ear to the ground enough to hear the specific sources. So I am interested in hearing from you. Is it like Marsha Blackburn or who's?
In this case, it's Commissioner O'Reilly. It was raising some issues from Wyoming, and but then that led then to Republicans specifically. Well, I'm doubting myself as to who it was exactly, but commissioners on the energy or the
Oh, it's okay.
what happens when you're so the ENC
Energy and Commerce Commission.
It is Energy and Commerce. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Then I was like, wait, but where's the telecom? I get so confused between all the state committees. They change them every 2 years, and the federal level. And anyway, ENC is like the major House committee on this stuff, and the Republicans there are calling for a major audit of Reconnect, which enrages me because it's like, let's investigate all these small carriers that have gotten a little bit of money to do this thing, and let's not investigate the billions of dollars that have gone to Frontier and Windstream, which have declared bankruptcy in the course of getting billions of dollars, or AT&T, which appears not to have made a connection better for a single person in Mississippi after getting $250 million. That's not auditable, but let's audit these small programs, the small grants. So I'm livid about it, and that's more or less the issue. Is whether or not government programs money is going to carriers that are then building in an area where there's already a company that claims to be offering more than 25.3.
Yeah.
Well, and Chris, I'll say I think one of the roots of this is the use of the word overbuilding. Overbuilding does not mean you're building too much. It does not mean you're paying for a network twice. Traditional use of the term overbuilder, and overbuilder just means someone who enters a market when there is already an incumbent. And so you might have a cable company that's providing cable TV, and then another cable company comes along, builds a cable plant, and offers cable TV. They are considered an overbuilder. They're not a first market entrant, it's a second market entrant. And what I think O'Reilly and others have done is torture this term and turn it into overbuilding is bad. It means we've built too much, or we're throwing too much subsidy money at something. And O'Reilly has some good examples where, one or two school districts have said, well, the city's building a fiber network, but let's also get one from the Fed, and let's get subsidy money from that as well. And that is waste in the program. And it is appropriate to label and find waste and eliminate it. But the word overbuilding isn't the right way to define that. Overbuilding just means competition.
I want to just say that, Dane, you're someone who I trust you get your facts right. And so I'm going to assume that that's correct. In the examples I've seen O'Reilly cite, it's often where it's a private company, which anytime I've looked into it, that company's been charging a ton of money, and the district decides it would be cheaper to build their own network. But I'm sure that, like I said, you're someone who gets your facts right.
No, you're right. And there was an example used, which was a district which was trying to get federal subsidy money when the city was already building a fiber network to them. It wouldn't be there for a year. So they said, we'll get subsidy money and we'll end up with 2 networks, and won't that be great? And that is waste in the program. And he's correct in citing that. But there is another example where a private carrier received subsidy money at some point in the past, built a network to the schools, hasn't fully recouped their cost, and now another bidder has offered cheaper service than continuing service with that carrier who got subsidy money. And O'Reilly says, we shouldn't pay for a new market entrant to build a new network. Well, he's right, because the first market entrant should be able to beat the new market entrant on price. And that's, you need to have an open procurement process, and you need to keep the incumbent carrier, even if they were subsidized, honest with regards to the rates that they get. And this is not the same as a program like the NTIA, BTOP, or RDOF, or one of these programs that's seeking out unserved premises.
Mhm.
This is the E-rate program that is seeking to connect every school at the lowest possible cost. And if someone new comes along and says, we're going to do it cheaper than those other guys, we, the government, the public that's spending this money, we should welcome that rather than making sure we're still lining the pockets of the person who got the grant 5 years ago.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I would say that I agree with Commissioner O'Reilly's sentiment and others that there's limited funds. We want to make sure they're spent in the most effective way possible. So, Travis, I want to give you a chance. If there's anything, you stay as far away from this stuff as possible.
Well, since we historically don't qualify for anything, but I am very sympathetic to a private company that has taken out a substantial amount of debt to build a network and then have public funds being utilized to, I guess, overbuild or compete with you at a reduced rate. You know, that would hit close to home. You know, the other side of it though is I'm never worried about it because we should be able to provide a better quality service than anyone that wants to come in and overbuild, which I think, quite frankly, discourages people from doing it. And then, lastly, who's the referee to decide if when and where these dollars should be spent, and if they're doing it in a malicious fashion because the current private company maybe is charging $10 more than somebody the referee thinks they should. Whose decision is that? The market is the market at the end of the day.
Right. I mean, the E-rate program has a competitive bidding process, which is supposed to deal with some of those concerns. But actually, I think this discussion in some ways really leads well into our discussion about open access, because it's a discussion about, building these different networks on top of each other in ways that may not be necessary if we have open infrastructure that can support the connectivity. Both Dane and Travis go way back to the day in which there was open access. There was a telephone network that effectively anyone could use and gain access to customers. And what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the show is, in some ways, if we could rebuild that, and as we are rebuilding that in some cities, a common fiber network that can be used by multiple carriers, how should we do it? What are the little nuances that we need to cover? So maybe we could just firstly lay out the approach that Ammon has used, Jeff, Ammon, Idaho, which is using a specific kind of open access that Dane will later be critiquing. But we'll start with discussing this approach because it's usually the one people are pretty excited about right now.
Let me give you an overview quickly.
Yeah, just do a thumbnail sketch.
Yeah. So, and as you think about overbuilding, I think it really asks the question, what's wrong with the system? If we're going to fix something, what should we fix? What's broken about the way we're delivering these services today and the infrastructure? So what Ammon has done is partnered with EntryPoint. We developed the technology, and it's the difference between what we're doing and, say, Utopia. I think Utopia is right now the biggest open access consortium in the country, and they've got 15 service providers, and it's what we call manual open access. What Ammon's got is software-defined automated open access. So the consumers in Ammon, they pay for the infrastructure separately.
Subscribers, Jeff.
Subscribers, thank you. The subscribers pay for the infrastructure independently. They pay for the maintenance and operation of the network independently, and they pay the ISP independently. And the magic in Ammon at the ISP, well, at the service provider level, is they can switch dynamically. So if you're frustrated on cost or service, whatever, or your service goes out, you just switch. It's a web portal, and you get in and you move.
So if Travis wants to jump in, just tell him briefly what he would have to do to offer service on there, and then he can ask a question or two to clarify. And once Travis gets it, I'll be sure that our audience has a sense of it.
Yeah, so all the providers there's a provider portal, there's a network operators portal, and there's a subscriber portal. And the service provider would basically get a presence of what we call the provider edge. So you'd be plugging into the provider edge, and basically you're going to occupy a port on a switch. And the software, if a subscriber wants to move from Dane's ISP to Travis's ISP, they unsubscribe from Dane and they hit the subscribe button under Travis's icon, and the software shuts down one port and opens up Travis's port.
So I guess the question is, so every home has the same equipment in it.
Yep.
There's no technical advantage for one person or another. You said that the homeowner contracts or pays for that. Who owns the fiber in the ground and the customer experience at the home?
So that it's a combination. So in Ammon's case, the city ultimately is the place of truth for the subscriber, but they, as we iterate through this software, the software has become increasingly powerful at helping the subscriber to know where their issue is. And then really the part of the goal of software-defined networking is to drive automation so that everything's transparent to the subscriber. And so if it's an issue with the ISP, the subscriber will know it. If it's an issue with physical infrastructure, the subscriber will know, everybody will know it, all the stakeholders.
So if there's a physical problem, the city is the one that sends a crew.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to understand. So like I just got a text from my outside plant manager of some fiber that was just dug up a few minutes ago. Our crews are on the way to splice it, fix it. We've already sent notifications out to the affected customers, giving them an ETA, owning the end-to-end experience. They'll be back up and running here probably in about a half hour. So if I'm this virtual ISP in Ammon and I'm connected in and Susie's internet isn't working because there's a fault in the street, am I calling somebody down at the city and trying to get them to go fix it?
Yeah. In reality, you would find with this network that you're not going to get very many calls. And I know you're used to owning the whole experience for your subscribers, but in this case, the city does a fantastic job of owning the customer experience. And the combination of fiber, a very well-designed network, and a bunch of automation makes the subscriber experience really elegant. And I think if you talk to the subscribers, that's exactly what they would tell you. So that doesn't mean problems don't occur.
Yeah, no.
When they do, the fiber department in Ammon is addressing them, and they do it very effectively.
Okay, so the independent group of people actually fix all these things. So, Dane and I, who are ISPs on this network, basically say whenever they show up is when it gets fixed, right? Because we won't control that experience,
right?
And the customers are used to that as an okay answer.
The subscribers know.
Okay.
If it's an ISP issue, it becomes obvious fairly quickly.
All right, and Dane, I don't mean to monopolize this, but I got like a million questions. So the one fundamental question I have here is, so why wouldn't I just come in? I am an ISP, charge $1 a month till all the other ones are out of business, and then own the market?
Well, it might work temporarily, but we've lowered the barriers to entry so much that you're going to have to do that over and over again, because immediately another ISP is going to come on to the network. You could come on from Minneapolis. We could make that happen.
Yeah. Well, this is what happened in the dial-up world, at least in Minneapolis, is there was kind of this unspoken rule of dial-up internet costs $19.95 a month. And everyone came on at $19.95 a month. And this one guy, Henry, came in at $9.95 a month and blew us all out of the water. And it upheaved the whole market. So I'm just curious, because I feel the barrier of entry, there needs to be a barrier of entry in any business. If we want to open a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Subway, there's some barrier to get in. Sure. This sounds like it's simply just connect at the IX and we're on. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty inexpensive. And if you have some level of sophistication, then you're going to connect pretty easily.
Oh, okay. All right. That's my fundamental question.
In Ammon, the rates did drop to $9.99 for the ISP for symmetrical gig 2 years ago, but there are still 4 ISPs on the network and 2 more are coming on.
And we
So
didn't see it drop.
I
mean,
wonder
it
why.
sort of hit that level and then it sort of settled, right? I mean, we haven't seen a lot of fluctuations since then.
no. Yeah.
See, it seems odd to me. Why in the world would I get on there and compete for a $9 product? It just seems, because your tech support, your billing, your customer service, all those fixed expenses you have, doesn't matter about the fiber.
So let me put that, and then I'll bring Dane into this too explicitly. Put yourself back 15 years ago when you were building this business and trying to figure out how to get more customers and without being limited in how fast you could build physically. If you suddenly had access to a pool of 100,000 customers to try to like pull in some subscribers using the fixed assets you already had, would that be attractive?
Well, it might be, but see, we've lived through this model before. So every time who was it at the time, Quest had a problem, the customers didn't understand that it was CenturyLink's or Quest's problem. It was our problem.
Right.
And that's where, between the price issue and not owning the infrastructure so you can control the entire customer experience, I think it would be challenging to maintain a high customer service level. Maybe I'm wrong. I
think if your full experience is with Quest, or in Dane's case with AT&T, you might be a little bit gun shy because of how many problems.
Well, no, it's just we've lived this already, and it was not good.
So what you're saying is you've lived through a software-defined network that's open access before? Who deployed that?
Well,
no.
one FB. Yeah.
Because I was thinking we were the first to do it.
No, this was back in the 90s. Dane, I think you're muted, bud. But this was back in the 90s when we bought phone lines. It's
Jeff, in the era of DSL resale, when ISPs were selling DSL on the incumbent telephone companies' networks, that was a software-defined network. You get a PVC for each customer, and the customers could switch ISPs at will. And that was 1998. So that model is not new per se. And I think the point Travis makes also is an interesting one, which is fundamentally, there'll be just a race to the bottom, and there'll be a $1 provider who doesn't answer the phone. And, in some way, in the long run, they hope to game some money out of the system. The price will go up in the long run or something like that. And so, I look at networks like the Utopia network with 15 providers, and I think 88,000 homes passed or so. A smaller network like Amen, and as a service provider, I can't see the point of entering. And so that's the struggle.
Let me jump in there for a second, Dane, because I think something that you just said, I don't want to trivialize it, but one of the things that I think cities are looking to do is not just to say, "Hey, midnight, midnight riders." No. Boy, today's not a good day for the words for me. But you don't want to just have any old person come in and suddenly be like, I'm going to sell this for $1. Cities will likely be vetting this. I mean, one of the things that I find interesting is cities often have contracts with ISPs in which they will answer the phone in a certain number of rings, and you can take an ISP off of the system for non-performance. And so, some of these things, I absolutely agree. These are real problems that could really poison the well for everyone. But I also feel like some of these things can be solved.
But I sorry, real quick, Dane. I think Dane and I could enter the Ammon network at $1 a month and provide as good a service as anyone that's there right now. And as soon as there's nobody, it's the old Starbucks game or the gas station.
Travis, so the second that then you try to take advantage of that and you say, you know what, now our price is going up to 12. Well, then I'm like, hey, time for Mitchell ISP. Here I come, baby.
Sure, yeah, and that's it. Yeah, I like Dane's thing. It's just a race to the bottom. So maybe for 6 months you're the $20 guy, and then you're back to the $2 guy, because you haven't paid for anything. All it is a cross connect, and you're on. I mean, that's genius.
No, I think Jeff would say this is a benefit, not a bug. If we're driving the prices down that low.
Yeah. Well, it depends on what you're looking for, and if. I think what Travis is highlighting and what I agree with is that, there is an opportunity for a bunch of volatility and confusion and consumers being sort of taken for a ride,
subscribers,
et cetera. On the other side, they might get great deals from time to time. I'd also say what you end up with is vanilla. Everybody gets the same product. There's no opportunity for innovation in the product itself. It
I'm
is,
so glad you said that, because we actually have a question in the chat asking this very question.
all
And
right. Well,
in some sense, I mean, if I understand correctly, I don't want to say what I'm about to say. I don't want it to negatively to be negative toward Utopia. But one of the things I think about the Utopia technology that they're using is that people are competing over delivering vanilla. And Jeff, one of the things that your company is aiming to do is to make sure that we have Baskin Robbins basically coming in. I should have said a local fresh to market, farm to market, dairy ice cream store that has lots of different flavors. But Jeff, how do they differentiate in Ammon, and what do you expect to see as you're going through the next version of software to allow differentiation of services? And bear in mind that this is specifically going to preempt Dane's next points that I really want to get to in terms of how he would do open access, because I think the way you would differentiate could not happen on Dane's. And that's where I want to take the conversation over time.
Yeah. So, the ISP reaction to the Ammon network is pretty consistent, but we didn't design the network thinking about, we care about all stakeholders, but we really designed it thinking, what does the customer want from their network and what's missing today? And so when we think about open access, the traditional definition does just relate to the ISP. It just means you've got multiple ISPs to choose from. We've just automated that interaction, and Ammon was the first where you could do it on demand. Dane has an example from the 90s. I mean, the SDN protocol wasn't implemented until 2008. So SDN under the current SDN protocol didn't come around until 2008. That's the protocol we're using. But to us, open means that the network is a set of resources that are open both to innovation and to consumers to get what they want from the network, and then to provide inputs back into the network. And so our definition is probably a radical definition of open access, meaning we're not really that excited about the ISP is a thing we've solved, and Ammon's experience has been really positive as far as the ISP stuff goes. The stuff we're excited about is everything else that will happen across the network, and that will be public safety stuff and everything we're doing over the top today, giving people the ability to do it on demand at layer 2, whether it's telemedicine or public safety or whatever. That's the stuff we're excited about, and we think that's the real innovation that we've got here. So, I understand ISPs can get frustrated. We do, really, I think what we're doing is we're forcing the ISP to automate because they won't be profitable if they don't.
And to be clear about that, because I think this is important, is that you're trying to take the ISP and lessen their power and give that power to the user in ways that that I don't see other open access approaches necessarily doing, because at that point, the ISP in Dane's edition, which I'll give you a second to describe your ideal, Dane, for open access, I feel like the ISP more clearly owns the user and will define what users can do. And yep. That's not necessarily bad. Dane, you may have reasons for why that's actually really good. But I think that's one of the differences that I think we should just make sure we're clear on. And Jeff, I mean, I think you're placing a bet that we are going to see new services that, much like in 2005, we did not see a use for Twitter. I know some people still today don't, but like there are applications I fundamentally believe that will be developed, that could be developed using the fact that you're able to do more layer 2 stuff without having to ask anyone's permission. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah. You will see next year things you can do across this network you can't do across other networks. So that's my check on me in a year, Chris, to make sure we achieve that. But you'll see innovative things that are only possible across this kind of network coming out. So, I don't want to diminish at all. I think Dane and Travis are both, I'm sure, running great businesses, and I know they care about their customers, which ultimately is a big part of what we're trying to deliver in terms of experience. Our definition of the problem has a lot to do with monopoly control. And we think the old model is siloed, and it's very difficult for customers to change in a siloed model. Really what we've done is torn down the barriers for customers. If they don't like the experience they're having, they can dynamically change. And the data doesn't back up what both Travis and Dane are worried about, which is somebody doing it for $1 to run the market down to nothing and then take over. That has not proven to be the case.
And I want to transition to Dane's model to make sure we have plenty of time to discuss all these options. But I want to take a moment to say, this is very serious. And the issue here that cities need to pay attention to is that Dane and Travis represent thousands of people that started these businesses and then were burned, in part because they did not control the infrastructure. Ammon is doing a really great job of professionally making sure the infrastructure remains strong. Cities that don't take this seriously, who may skimp on how fast they respond to a fiber cut or other problem, they're going to create a world of problems for themselves, because ISPs have been burned before, and they're not going to stick around if that's what happens in that city on that network. So Dane, I'm coming to you. I'm the mayor that has unlimited power, and I want to build an interesting open access network. How do you have me do it?
Well, I think it's important first to frame the problem. And the problem is that the residents of your city have bad internet, limited choices, usage caps we talked about. They're paying too much. The customer service is poor. They're suffering outages, and the community is not well connected and well served, and that is a political pain point. And I really think it's interesting. You know, there's a lot of legislation in cities that makes it very challenging for communities to invest in their own infrastructure. I think that's really wrong-headed. If Travis or myself build a great network, there will not be a political will to spend a bunch of public money to build a network over the top of us and compete with us. If, on the other hand, you've got a cable operator with usage caps and some slow old DSL, and everybody in town agrees the internet is awful, that public should be able to buy a network. And when they begin that process, they hire a consultant and they start talking to other communities, and they look at entities like Chattanooga's EPB, Utopia, Ammon. They look at successful models, LUS, and they say, well, these are successful models. They're working. They got this built. And so we should do it that way. And I think they go too far, and they do more than they need to, and they end up with a lesser outcome. And what I mean by that is, you think we're going to build a publicly funded open access network, and then immediately your consultants say, well, that should be a lit network. Your equipment vendors say, well, here's some GPON equipment that we'd love to sell you. Here's the equipment that's going to go in the home. And here's all the middleware and the billing platform and all the bits and bobs that put this stuff together. Suddenly you've got a very complex network. You also have a network that delivers vanilla. It delivers today's symmetric gigabit product to the same CPE in every home. What I would argue is that an investment in a dark fiber network that is simply glass, no electronics or optronics in that network at all, and then invite service providers in to light it, creates some really unique positive benefits. One, you don't have the complexity. You don't need a billing platform, a provisioning platform. It becomes a much simpler network to build, and a much simpler network to budget to build.
So can I
the other side is,
let me just ask a clarifying question.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Clarifying question. So this is a network that would actually effectively stub out at the house, and you would attach them there, and it would effectively go back to some kind of locked area where ISPs could go and turn it on.
Yeah, so think fiber jack or 2 fiber jacks in the house that go back to a central hut. Service providers locate equipment in the hut. They put in the equipment that they'd like to deploy. They provide customer equipment to plug into the jack. And I might deploy GPON technology, which is capable of delivering 1 gigabit symmetric, and I might not do television. Travis might come along 6 months, a year later, and deploy XGS PON equipment. And he might deliver 10 gigabit and an IPTV platform. someone else might come along and provide voice and home security or something else. And the point is that the service provider now has a point of innovation and a point of control, a point of provisioning. They can automate and manage their network in the ways that they manage an owned and operated network that they might build, like Travis and we do, in the markets that we serve elsewhere. And I look at Utopia, which is an open access lit fiber network with about 15 service providers on it, and they literally have a spreadsheet that's like, here's the 15 providers, here's the 5 different speeds, and here's their price. And it's like, they're all the same, and it's all very vanilla.
I think they would object to that. I mean, I can tell you that, for instance, X-Mission does things differently than some of the others do. And if you talk to, for instance, Jesse Harris, who I want to have on this show eventually, who does a lot of writing about it closely, I would just say that we can generalize and say that we would like to see more differentiation, but I don't want to pretend that they are actually all the same.
Well, so the other side of it is you're adding a whole bunch of unnecessary complexity. I'll say that fiber to the premise networks themselves are actually really simple, right? It's an optical cable that goes from the home back through a number of splice points to a central location. And if a city can run a sewer system or a water system, they can run a glass passive optical network. The stuff that goes on top of that, the customer premise equipment, the provisioning mechanisms, the interconnection up to the internet, all the customer service that goes along with that is complex. And the entities that'll tell you, hey, small city, you should do that, are the consultants that are going to earn a lot of money helping you, your own city staff who would like to nation build and build a department for themselves, and the equipment vendors who want to sell you all the gear to run the darn thing. And you're a small volume buyer who's going to try and run this whole platform, and it's unnecessary, and you end up with less innovation and an unwillingness to enter the market from the majority of serious and large service providers. So you think about Google, whose open access project in Huntsville is dark fiber. They have another one, I think in Idaho, that is dark conduit, empty conduit.
Iowa, and one of the other I's.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So, when I think about where would we be willing to go and what would we bring that would be useful? Why is it worth us going to do that?
So, Dane, let me
innovation and services.
Right. And first of all, let me say that as we dig into this, I really want to see this happen. I want to see the empirical results. And so one of the questions that we have from a colleague of Jeff's, to be transparent, is noting that in dark fiber instances, it does not seem like we get robust competition. It seems like effectively it's one entity uses it. You mentioned Google Fiber. Travis has been very clear. He would never enter an open network where Google is. And also Travis is an Ethernet guy, just FYI.
Well, my position on Google was pretty, as you and I talked about over our last round of chicken wings, is this. I just checked while we're out here. I mean, we're pushing about 80 gigabit to Google right now for YouTube TV, and all these other services. You think for a minute I want to compete with these guys on the access side? Who knows what happens on the content side? I'm not saying there's anything might happen, but it sure could, which could really impact our business as a whole. So that's why if Google's there, I'm out.
And so that's the sort of thing and so Dane, yeah. I mean, I want to say this is a very good question in terms of where we've seen some dark fiber approaches. We haven't seen the robust competition. If this question goes to me, I would say that we haven't seen it in a large enough city to really know what happens. But how do you respond to it?
So what we've seen is that the vast majority of municipalities that have moved ahead with open access networks have been convinced by their consultants and equipment vendors that they need to light that network. And
what cities are those, Dane? What are you talking about?
Well, Ammon, Idaho.
All the retail. Well, a lot of the retail.
Ammon has the lowest. So Ammon has the lowest prices in the world, according to the connectivity report. And they've got a 63% take rate that's climbing every month. So where's the calamity that Fast Company magazine says Ammon's the best fiber optic network in the country?
Sorry, Jeff, I don't think, for this purposes, I don't feel like we should litigate Ammon specifically. I think Dane's making a point, which I think is unnecessarily cynical, and I'd like to reframe it to address it, which is that consultants who care most about their interests of their clients are worried about offering a dark fiber model that they haven't seen proven anywhere. It's classic chicken and the egg. And so I think we have a lot of cities that would be interested in this, but there's not a lot of evidence for it. And so, Dane is someone who I brought on the show because I like talking to him, but also because I take very seriously that if he thinks something will work, I am very interested in trying it. The issue is that we haven't seen it work. Now, Huntsville is a large city. They did this but you had to do drops. You had to pay for the drops. And so the cost to an ISP is still probably itching up close to $1,000 to acquire a customer. Dane, how much does it cost to acquire a customer in the model that you're suggesting? Because I think that's one of the limiters in getting customers on this model.
Well, and I don't want to throw Google or Huntsville under the bus, but I will, because that network was really designed for one carrier. It's ostensibly open access, and there's some limited open access capabilities. But because the carrier pays for the drop and does that drop facility and owns it, and more critically, because it's a split passive optical network. There's splitters out in the field. It's really a challenging network to see as open access dark fiber. And I think they've labeled it as open access dark fiber, but it would be very challenging for a second or third or fifth market entrant to go in there. This recipe requires a home run strand or two from the home and a jack in the home that is accessible to the consumer back to a hut location where ISPs can co-locate. And one ISP might deploy one brand or protocol of equipment, another. One might offer one array of services and another a different array. But to your point of, we haven't seen this work, and how does a community gain confidence in this? You do need an anchor tenant. So if you say, we've got 10,000 homes, we're going to have those homes pay to build a dark fiber network to them, we need one or two service providers who are committing to come into those co-location facilities and deploy equipment and provide a retail service. And I think that's an important confidence component. But there's another piece of this, which is...
Can we hold on from that? I feel like Travis hasn't talked long enough that I'm afraid of what he's going to say next.
No, I mean, I like the idea. I guess if there was just it's the CLEC model, right? You're going to buy pairs of copper to the home, and you can choose to do with it what you want. In that case, we would lease, I assume, a dark fiber from a home or a business back to the hut, and then off we go. I mean, it's a doable model. I guess I still struggle because I deal with it every single day. There's been a pothole out in front of my house for the last 2 years that the city's supposed to deal with, and they can't do that. And I want these same group of people dealing with my technology. That's where I struggle with it.
I certainly see that as a valid criticism and a concern. I think on the other side, if you have a community that has nobody deploying, they haven't managed to attract you or I or their incumbent cable operator to deploy or improve services, and they want to invest in the services, you're going to end up in an outcome where they have to maintain them. But to clarify, the business model that I'm suggesting isn't that you would lease dark fiber to the home. It's that the homeowners would invest in dark fiber from their home. And they might do that via a bond measure, a property tax payment, a utility users tax,
a home loan. We talked about this in a show that I should have done, is connect this with OSFI, with his founder Shaheen last week. And I think Rye will make a note to put it in the show notes along with this. But yeah, I really like that. Dane, you're talking about creatively financing this in a way similar to what Jeff has done in terms of creative financing. This is a question that came up in the chat, so I wanted to address it. I feel like the model that what you just said, Dane, suggests to me that we would not expect that a city would say, I kind of like what Chattanooga's doing. I'm going to bond it the same way, and I'm going to build it, and it's going to pay for itself in the same way. And I think this is another issue that cities have to deal with, is that open access coming in the United States in 2020 is not something that will just generate enough revenues in the first 5 years to pay for itself, most likely.
Well, the thing is, cities are and should be averse to risk. And fundamentally, I don't think that they should need to worry about take rate or service fees or credit worthiness of service providers. The idea here is that the public, the homeowners, collectively, based on a majority decision, decide that they want to build a multi-million-dollar fiber to the home network. And they're going to pay for that over time in some way, like a utility user's tax or an assessment on their property tax, just like you would today if you're repaving a road or upgrading a sewer system. And now what you have is a home with a tail, fiber going from the home to the central point, and that's being paid for on your property taxes. You own that now. Now, Travis or myself rent a rack in the hut or in the central location, and we cross connect to those locations. And we don't, there's no need for record keeping or billing, because the consumer says, please connect me to ISP-A, and we send a technician in and plug that in. There's no billing relationship with the city because the public has paid for the network. And it's attractive to us because we're not building a network, so we can now deliver a cost-efficient service. And we haven't seen this model advanced, I think, because there's a lot of momentum around, you have to manage and light a network. But I really think that it's a wrong-headed way to look at it.
I've been talking about this model, frankly, solves the cost issue of digital divide. It really drives the prices down. You can put interesting requests on it. I will say that, like, one of the reasons we've been very successful about fighting attempts to stop cities' ability to build networks is because most of the cities that have built networks have done it without using taxpayer dollars. What you're proposing is a on the board, totally transparent subsidy for building an open network, which I love. But I can imagine that Comcast will have a field day rallying legislators to say this is unfair. And we can all laugh about it, but at the end of the day, we're not going to be giving millions of dollars to those folks in Sacramento to make sure that we can keep this model going. So I feel like that I think is the biggest challenge to this model. And I'm very happy to work with communities that want to overcome it, because I think this model literally gets us, I mean, frankly, I don't want to say this model like yours, Dane and Jeff, you're both close enough to each other that either one of these models gets us to the country we want to be in terms of having access to everyone being on the internet, having choices, innovation, things like that. So let me throw it back to you, Jeff, because once again, you haven't said anything in a while.
Yeah, so I mean, the difference really, Dane, I'm not arguing. If the city wants to put it to a vote, great. I'm all for that. I think Chris is right that in most cases they can't do that. It creates you create an opposition that may not be there otherwise. Where in our model, we just leave it to the subscriber to choose whether they want to opt in or not. But the key thing is on the technology side, what you're saying is complexity is the problem. Our whole premise is the way to solve complexity is with software. You solve complexity with automation. That's, I mean, in the world we live in, that's the way complexity gets addressed everywhere. Our model, we sometimes will refer to it as data center to the premise. So we really, software-defined networking has primarily been implemented in the data center, to some degree in the enterprise, but primarily it's been implemented in the data center. And so we took that model of what's been implemented in the data center and said, all right, how do we overlay this onto a city, this same functionality? And really what we're doing is what you want to do physically in terms of plugging somebody in and unplug them is we're doing that with software and automation and this SDM protocol. So we would argue that you're still technically at a siloed model. And what it reminds me of is the first time I went into a data center and I would see company A partition from another company with a cage. That's my strongest memory of going into a data center. There was a physical cage to separate this company's rack of computers from that company's rack of computers. We don't see that cage anymore because those physical problems were all solved with software. And we would argue we're much more open to innovation in our model because we make it easier for the telemedicine company. I mean, if you're going to give an ISP control of the last mile, then what about some other company that wants to do something dynamically across that network connection? We can do it because we've got virtual machines, we've got containers at the edge. So our whole premise is that everything interesting is going to happen in software at the edge. So go ahead.
I would respond to that and say that everything interesting will happen over the top. In the long run,
It's true today.
In the long run, the internet is the application. All of the stuff that will come over it. And you think about, cable TV is a great example, right? It used to come in over a coaxial cable, and now it doesn't matter. You're on Wi-Fi, you're on a tablet, you're on a television, doesn't matter. Television and being entertained is now an app. And so, I get the idea that there might be some future innovative application that requires layer 2, but I'm very skeptical that complexity is required. And in the end, for ubiquitous access to whatever that resource is, it'll go over the top.
Chris, you should have us on in a year, and we'll see if anything interesting is happening at layer 2 in an automated
No,
way.
I think this is good because this is, this is, I just go back to there's very good reasons that engineers will say one or the other, and the people that follow this very closely will focus on why trends will go one way or the other. And I just think that one of the reasons I like having both of you on is I think you're interested in knowing. You're not going to be interested in lying about the results of next year, but if we see these applications develop, I'm very interested in it. One of the things I wanted to make sure was very clear to people who are listening is that both of you are also proposing something that we don't see proposed by cities, which is that the service provider is not paying for the infrastructure, or is not paying for access to the infrastructure. Most cities are contemplating where there's open infrastructure, you charge a fee per line. And you're proposing that, once again, we adopt the road model, which would be UPS does not pay per house it goes to and uses the roads to get to. It just uses the roads as it sees fit. It's not a perfect analogy, but this is something that I think is really interesting. It further drives the price down, but it does then put more pressure on the public to finance it, whether it's through a user fee upfront, as Jeff does, which can be amortized over many years, or via a public bond in the way that Dane is proposing. And I mean, this is a show that mostly I think attracts people who are deeper into this than cities, but cities should be trying this. This is the time to be trying to figure out how these different models would work well. Now, Travis, let me give you a chance to jump back in.
Well, I guess honestly, I kind of like both models. I like Jeff's model because the barrier of entry is real easy to get into, and I could be the $5 internet guy in Hammond or wherever it is, and because my product,
you should drive there. You should take your 5G modem and go there.
Because I'm the same as everybody else, right? Where it's just a homogeneous. I mean, okay, maybe I can put a content server a little bit closer. That's about all I can really do in Jeff's model. So, yeah, but in Dane's model, now Dane and I can actually compete, because maybe Dane's a GPON guy and I'm an active Ethernet guy. Now I have something I can market to, and I can actually differentiate myself from Dane, and Dane the same thing here. No different than what we do with CenturyLink in Minneapolis. CenturyLink is a GPON network. We're an active Ethernet network.
Yes, so that's the big difference between you two.
So what do you think we do? We promote the hell out of that technical thing. The part I'm totally confused in both of these models is, and this is coming from a guy who's probably knocked on 3,000 doors. Are you proposing that I go up to a future customer and say, "Oh, hello, Mr. Customer, I'd like to raise your taxes to pay for internet," and they will turn around and look at Comcast and go, "Yeah, but I know it's expensive and it sucks and I got to call them every year, but they're not going to charge me more." And and just the way taxes work here in Minneapolis, they charged us for something called the Metrodome, which was some stadium for sports players back in the 80s. We're still paying the tax. They tore it down and stuck up a new one. So the tax is never going to go away. So I guess I would just ask, how are these networks going to be funded?
So Travis, let's just be clear though.
Yeah.
There's multiple instances in which conservative and liberal places have voted to either increase their taxes or to use their taxpayer dollars to build networks like this. In any event, you are not the public face of that campaign.
No, I'm just wondering, because someone's got to pay for this, right? So, and these things, I mean, I know how much my debt is right now. And, I don't know if Dane's flush with cash right now, but, debt service through the nose in
Does have a
building
new ring light.
these networks are not cheap. So I'm not sure I totally understand how these networks get paid.
Well,
Sorry, one other thing to just keep it light, which is that Dane is building underground in San Francisco. You're building underground in Minneapolis.
Yeah, God, yeah, he's got it way worse than I have. Yeah.
Well, to be clear, we're building aerial in San Francisco.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
And our networks are in San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley. I mean, it's the San Francisco Bay Area. It is an expensive place to build. Fundamentally, what we're talking about is asking the public, do you hate your provider? Does your internet suck? And just like today, we go to the public and we say, do your schools suck? Would you like to pass this bond measure, which is going to make your schools better? Would you like to make the libraries better? And the public passes bond measures and they accept the outcomes of those. And yes, sometimes that means a stadium, which is, not where I'd spend my money. But it needs to be a majority or a supermajority in some cases vote. And if everybody in that town agrees that their internet is really poor, and if the bond measure says we can raise money and pay for it over 20 years, which is something I can't do. I can't raise 20-year money. I also can't pay the interest rates that a city can, right? They get very good interest rates. And so if the city says to build a dark fiber network that's going to last 50 plus years to every home and to pay for that over 20 years is going to be a $300 per year assessment on each property's property tax, or a $20 a month assessment on your water bill for the next 20 years. But what you've built then is an optical network that's gigabit plus capable to every home that goes back to these central points. And here's one or two carriers who've said, gosh, we're ready. If that network existed, we would offer services over it. So that's the premise.
And who's going to pay the legal fees to fight Comcast, CenturyLink, Frontier?
Well, the cities will. I mean, this is the cities.
Oh, no. We learned that. They won't.
Well, Travis, in that case, you're right. They won't. But on the other hand, Lafayette, so empirically, Lafayette spent $3 million roughly in legal battles over like 5 years for the right to build their fiber network. So there's different experiences with different folks.
I would be real interested to talk to that guy, because whoever ran that program in Lafayette had but I've never met anyone that works at a city that's like, yep, I'm willing to take a 5-year battle to get this passed. So there's one example.
No, there's multiple. Monticello, Minnesota went through a program.
And that was a fiasco, right? Harvick's running that network now. That's not even being run by the city anymore.
Well, the city still owns it. And actually, I just did an interview with Jeff O'Neill, not Jeff Christensen, who's on the screen, but about that. My point is just that many cities have gone forward. Your premise is that cities will be scared off from the lawsuits, and there's just some cities will be. Some cities will be.
How about cities like San Francisco or Los Angeles or Dallas?
If San Francisco would stop having its top officers indicted, we could talk about it.
I'm talking like, how about an NFL market? Are any of them doing it?
I don't think so. I don't think this is an NFL market kind of thing right away. I mean, I think it's a smaller city.
Those large markets don't have the same problem that these small markets that have been neglected have. And I don't think you're going to get a majority of voters in Los Angeles or San Francisco saying my internet is so awful or unavailable here that I want to spend a small assessment for the next 20 years to build a new network. But in a small town that's been passed by everyone, I think you're going to have a substantial majority saying, yeah, we want to build and own our own network. And if the majority vote to do that, whether it's build a new library or a new elementary school or repaving a road or running fiber to homes, I think that's a really survivable legal challenge.
Doesn't it go back to our first conversation though? Is if the FCC sets the speed limit at 25.3, now all your WISPs and all these other players can function. I mean, if they naturally set it at, I don't know, let's just say for conversation gig, and all those dollars that are getting pumped into these markets would have to go into fiber networks instead of these alternate networks.
There's sort of a misconception in this, in that I think, Dane, you're talking about towns that are like 50,000, 100,000 people. Those are areas where the FCC definition doesn't matter as much for these subsidies. But
Yeah, and
we're running, so
I don't
we're
want
gonna have to go to
muddy the
closing
waters.
comments here soon. Go ahead.
The passion is so great here.
No, go ahead, Dane. But
Well,
just be aware that we're running out of time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to address markets where subsidies are available. Like if a market has no service and subsidies are available, and the municipality wants to apply for those subsidies, or a carrier does, well, then whoever has the best, lowest cost proposal should win those subsidy dollars. What I'm thinking about, Travis, is, markets, you've got a market of 50 or 100,000 homes where the majority do have some level of service, but we all who live here agree that it's awful. That carrier needs to either step up and improve that network, or we, the majority, are going to vote to buy our own network. And the answer isn't for the incumbent carrier to sue the city. It's going to be for the incumbent carrier to upgrade their network and convince the public that they don't want to take that risk and invest those dollars.
Also, fair enough. Yeah.
Travis, don't forget that we're talking about, some of these cities are dealing with Mediacom versus Frontier. We're not talking about Comcast. We're not talking about the paradise of Comcast versus CenturyLink here. But then the other piece of it is CenturyLink is now doing this in Springfield, Missouri, where the city has built a network. Not exactly the way that we've talked about, but nonetheless, the concept is strictly there. And so there's a world in which CenturyLink, which should really be called Level 3 at this point, which I guess has changed its name to something else that's dumb.
Lumen or something now,
Lumos?
right?
Yeah. It just reminds me of the Final Fantasy games that I love to play. But anyway, like, you can imagine a world in which a company like that starts to use this model then. And so the question, and let me ask, is there any like compelling points that anyone wants to make? Because I feel like we got to a point that I was expecting in terms of illuminating some of the differences, important decisions a community has to make. And the fact that Travis will try just about anything just to get a sense of the empirical results rather than making his mind up ahead of time, which I appreciate.
I'll weigh in with Travis that we build Ethernet networks and not PON networks. So I'm going to line up with you there, Travis.
Woo, there you go.
And, we've kind of bounced back and forth between business model issues and technology issues. And so we probably should have divided this up into two different buckets.
We need a better host.
Well, I think what I'm hearing, the moral of the story is people are getting hooked up. All three of us are hooking people up, providing a better experience. I think the models are interesting. I guess because I'm swimming in debt, I'm always very careful to really be too gung-ho about letting people, I guess, overbuild us. Not that they ever would, but there's always that potential fear.
And I would just say, based on what you just said, Travis, is that not enough. We don't have cities that are really trying what Dane is doing, and I think we should. Not because I think that I know which the best model is, but because I would like to see it in action, and I like to see it in a couple of places. I mean, I think, Jeff, I'm very excited because we're going to see theEmmon model in more places. It's being built today in at least 3 places, and we're going to see many more of those in coming years. And I think we should have cities that are trying the way Dane is proposing it, and then we can come back and look at the lessons learned.
Yeah, I'm good with that. We'll come overlay our software after the silos are broken.
So how do we?
That is one of the nice things about Dane's model. You got to say is that Dane's model decomposes nicely. You can do anything with that network once it's been built. I mean, if you want to change the way it's being done, you're not like necessarily locked into a technology or a business model.
Well, you can imagine a scenario where it fails. No service provider shows up. Well, the city can then become like sort of carrier of last resort and light their own network and just deliver internet over it. And it can become an EPB in the end. So it's really very little risk.
I think you're approaching malpractice if you put a shovel in the ground without having a kind of a anchor tenant like you'd suggested.
Clearly, yeah.
Okay, Dane, we'll see you in a year.
Perfect.
All right.
And maybe we'll do this in person.
For an application that argues for the complexity.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I've enjoyed this show. Judging from the chat room, I think people were intrigued. So I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you all in a year, maybe even before then, about different things, because y'all have interesting points of view on lots of things.